Hello, dear friends, and welcome to this special mini-series of the Insight Reading Enlightenment podcast, created in collaboration with the Center of Early Music in Cologne, ZAMUS, for their Decolonisation Symposium. My name is Darina Ablogina. Over the next 3 episodes, we will open our ears and hearts to voices that challenge the ways we think about early music, its histories, its legacies, and its future. In today's episode, we begin by looking ahead with Dr. Rahab Njeri, a brilliant thinker and speaker whose work centers on decolonial futures in the arts. What might it mean to imagine a different musical landscape, one that acknowledges its colonial past while dreaming of something freer, fairer, and more inclusive?
So my name is Dr. Rahab Njeri. I am a historian, scholar, and community activist. I work currently at the University of Cologne, where I am involved in the consultation of anti-racism for BIPOC employees, but also for the strategies and processes that have to do with anti-racism. And my paper today was about decolonial or decolonizing aesthetic in terms of, for instance, how do we view art? What kind of languages do we use even when we're talking about, when you're talking about music, when you're talking about visual arts? Who are the people who are represented and who are the people who are not represented? Who are the key voices within, this movement? What role do they play or do they not play? How can we decolonize then aesthetics? And in my presentation, I also showed, the famous Picasso, who in 1907 kind of discovered a new form of art. I think it's Cubism. And you can really clearly see that his art changes once he goes to the museum in Paris, sees the African masks, and that influences his art. But at the same time, we do not discuss about that when we're speaking about Picasso. We also don't speak about other African artists who are also at that time, who are also doing incredible work. But whose art was invisible. And it was important for me just being able to go back, relearning and learning something new with this invitation about, creating new spaces, approaches to colonial heritage in early music, as the title was of the symposium.
And how did you feel about this direct inspiration, let's say, of the Cubism of Picasso when you discovered where he found those images and how he implemented them?
For me, I don't find that is problematic. The only thing that I find problematic is not mentioning from where it comes from. Because, of course, we celebrate Picasso as this huge genius artist. And with all respect, he was. But at the same time, we should also mention where the inspiration is coming from. This is also not something that is taught when you're speaking about Picasso, right? I think there's a different narrative or a different story of how he came about into, becoming this amazing person or amazing painter or amazing, artist for that sense. The act of acknowledging and realizing that it's not just one story, it's multiple stories that influence or had influenced him into becoming what he became. If I am looking at this art and I know, his inspiration came from African masks, I am looking at it, of course, from a very different perspective. And also the language that we are going to be using while we are speaking about African masks is also going to change, right? It's going to be one of transformative, because then we know, this is where the inspiration comes from. But when we don't do that, it seems as if this was something that he just discovered, as it's mostly written that he discovered, but there were already people who were already doing this art, and they were not acknowledged, and they were not seen, and they were not heard.
Coming to the subject of humanizing, you were mentioning the term critical diversity, and I found that is a super important topic to talk about. Could you maybe highlight on that point what it means? In which sense have you used it?
I think it's good we're all speaking about diversity, but then also who is speaking about diversity. And I think, as I said, the neoliberal form of diversity is this really nice thing. We are all diverse. We have different peoples, for instance, in an organization. But at the same time, we forget the histories of these institutions. We forget to dig deeper into the institutions. Diversity is, in how I see it without it being very critical, is, we include a couple of people and then we are good. But we're really not going deep. We are really not speaking about, okay, so if these institutions have been working for 10, 20, 100 years without BIPOCs, why all of a sudden the interest? What has happened in between? Does it really change the praxis, the routine of these institutions? Are they the people making the decisions, or is it just about having symbolic representation, which would be you just get a couple of people, take the pictures, and then you say, we've done with it. So in terms of like in racism, you take a picture of a few people who are diverse, and then you say our institution doesn't have racism. BIPOC themselves, they tell a very different story. They tell stories of experiencing racism or discrimination, of not being seen, of not being heard. And so the question is this really changing the institutions?
What is your impression? Is it really the institutions, are they changing?
I have a yain answer to that. Yes, I see progress. And as I say today in the morning, I think it's very important to acknowledge that, this has been hard work from generations before us. And so for that, I see progress. I see that some institutions are on the way of changing, in the progress of changing. But it also takes a lot of time, right? It takes a lot of resources also. And the real question is, are these institutions really willing to change?
What do you think? That's a good question.
I think there are some that are willing and they're already doing the work, and there are some that don't. And that's just the reality of it. Yeah, there are some who will continue working with symbolic representation. And there are some who are going to take it on the next level of really looking at the institutions from a critical perspective and really bringing change into the institutions. But then at the same time, I'm always asking myself, can we really be able to change institutions that already have a history? And so I'm looking at all institutions that were actually not meant for people who look like me.
You were also talking about the power and the profit, and that's kind of a motivation point for all the history behind that was happening before. And partly, I guess, nowadays, that's why some of the, let's say, institutions, they are changing slower or not changing at all.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And then who is having the power, who is doing the power sharing and who is not, who is being included in the institutions and who is not being included in the institutions. From a very Ubuntu perspective, which is the African philosophy of living, it's not only a philosophy, but the African way of living, of saying, I am only human if you're human, and I can only be well if you're well. That will definitely mean that this work is also not only a continuation of what our ancestors, both living and who have already transitioned, but it's also for the next generation. We all have a form of accountability and responsibility towards the next generation. And so I really think that most people, and if I may speak for myself, it's really the concept of hope. Hope that the next generation will have it much better than maybe I did, or, just the same as the generation before, hope that it will be better for my generation. And so I see hope as a radical form of transformation in terms of how we want it for the next generation, right? How are we accountable for that next generation? And also a way of taking responsibility. Yeah, so that's how I see it.
For me, it sounds like it should imply a lot of empathy to each other. And I think it's such a global philosophical question. Are people able to come to this level of empathy and deepness? Is trauma, maybe generational trauma, historical background, is it still allowing us, people in general, to go into this depth, into this level of empathy to each other?
I think it's a goal that you must want to achieve, right? So while in time and in history we have always considered a group of people to be more human than the rest, the others have been dehumanized. And so why were they dehumanized? Because they were not inhuman enough to be respected and to, to be seen as human, right? And, if you go back to history and, read about how, the colonizers regarded or saw or perceived Black and brown people, then you understand there was also a lot of dehumanization that was taking place. And so I don't know how the European would, think about that, because you would have to, I don't even know how to put this. How do I put this? It would be a concept that you would have to understand where it comes from and why it's important in order for you to understand why it's important to say, I'm only human if you're human. Which also means, like, if I see another human being suffering, it does something to me, right? It's only a person who has no feelings, or a person who doesn't regard someone else as a human being, that would see someone else suffering and think, oh, that's fine, or, laugh, so in really simple terms. But when we understand that as a way of living, not a philosophy, not the philosophy in terms of how we think about from an Eurocentric perspective, but as a way of living, then of course it's a radical way of thinking about how we can be human with each other, how we can be able to interact with each other, how we can be able to talk with each other, and how we can also be able to share with each other. So I think it needs more than that.
Do you think in the nearest future that goal is reachable in the modern world, how it is developing?
I have absolutely no idea. From an Afrofuturistic, maybe yes. But I absolutely have no idea if this is possible. I mean, it's a dream and it's a wish and it's a hope that I have that this is going to be possible, that, we can be able to be human, that we can be able to be human with each other, that we can be able to see each other, listen to each other, learn from each other. It might seem as if it's something that is very utopic, something very, very, very far from the kind of world we are in right now. But I think as human beings, we all have hope. And the hope is that is going to be possible, that we can be able to speak with each other, and that it can be able to sit in one table without us killing each other, that it's possible for us to be able to share and break bread with each other. But of course, I also understand that we are living in difficult times, in the difficult world, where some of this hope and some of these dreams seems as if they're very far. As my mother always says, or, continues to say, I should continue dreaming bigger, that my own dreams scare me. So I hope it scares me to reality, that is going to be true. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Njeri.
Thank you.
It was a great talk.
Thank you.
From the future, we now move toward the past, but with fresh eyes and renewed curiosity. Jorge Silva, a performer and researcher, invites us to rediscover some of the most familiar Baroque dances. But what if these dances carry echoes of African and South American traditions hidden beneath layers of European history?
So, my name is Jorge Silva, and I'm a Portuguese Cape Verdean harpsichordist and singer, and I'm also a vocal coach, and very recently I'm an artistic coach. So my talk was mainly about trying to find the root of dances and how they influence the dances and in our world, Baroque dancing, and so trying to pick dances that are very much used in our business, as in music, Baroque music, like sarabande or chacons or chaconas, and try to find like where is this coming from, and just kind of like asking more questions about where is this coming from, and so that's where my talk was about.
How did you come to this topic? How did you come to this idea about dances and looking what's behind them?
Yeah. So obviously when you're a harpsichordist, you do a lot of repertoire that are either very connected to voice, so singing and so on, and the other side of it is very much dances. And so in the music field, I often find that when I was doing this kind of stuff, I was trying to like understand like why is this not making us together, and I find that it was kind of like making us drift apart. Yeah, in the sense of like when we do dances and so on and so on. And I was saying in the talk, adding the diversity of like hip hop, or as in like black music, and then so it kind of gives the category that these dances are like white music, air quotes, and so that's when I got a bit more interested in like, is that actually like true? And so like the more I dig into this kind of black hole, because it's a black hole, like the more you find, and so it's like a non-ending, and you've seen in the conversations like the trading, like this musical borrow here, and then the Italy borrow this from here, and this from this person. So it's very much like a non-ending material, and that's why I got very interested, and I found like, yeah, maybe this is something that I can actually bring us together. And again, understanding the history and respecting the history, and instead of kind of making different things and so separating us, it's doing something that brings us together. And so that was the idea of my talk today, and also like why I got so interested in the dances.
Could you maybe highlight some of the points that you were digging into and also that you described in your presentation, the dances? I was astonished, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a wonderful input.
Yeah, so basically like about the sarabande, it's a very flagrant one, is like how different it changed, because it was so fast tempo and so quick and so intense and so fiery and very body kind of quality, and as I said, it was used for a fertility ritual. So it was used for the couple to bring a child into the world. So again, you can, even when I speak, you can see the passion of it, like how much passion it is in this dance. And so to see the evolution of this dance, and then the so different names of this dance, like the sarabanda and the sarambeke, the zumbe or the zumbe, like so many. You just like wonder, because obviously the sarabande was banished, prohibited by the white colonials to be performed, because it was so indecent and so luscious and so, as they said, sensual or sexual, and so indecent. But also knowing that they would still perform on their masters, the slaves, and they would also perform in like small gatherings and parties. But then that dance kind of transported to Europe and all these places to be refined. So the tempo became slower and slower, and so like to be danced as I showed in the room. Like,
do you perceive it as an act of cultural appropriation? What happened with sarabande?
I don't think so. I think the idea is because they took the dance, obviously, but then they changed it. So I think it's a bit more like, we don't approve this, so we're going to do something else, and it's going to be better. So I don't know if it's cultural appropriation, because when you do cultural appropriation, it's like you kind of appropriate this, but you're still using it. You know what I mean? So as in here, it was more like strip something and kind of like take something away, but then change it completely. So that is something that is completely unrecognizable. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, but I think they banned this dance because it, as you said, it was considered as a somewhat dirty dance.
Very devil dance.
Exactly. So I'm just wondering about this transformation. How do you experience that? Researching on that topic? Yeah, this evolution. In which light, in which sense do you perceive that?
Yeah, it's the very fine line, because it's very difficult to, very good question actually. It's very difficult to keep track, because we know like where it started, and then like, okay, there was this trading here, and so like you kind of like find it again, but in a different continent, and so at center point it's very difficult to keep track. But we know like once it arrived to the colonial territory, like to Spain or to Portugal or to Germany or etc. Like we know that there are records of this dance being there, but being slowly shifted into a different thing. And then eventually you just kind of lose track, and then eventually it just became sarabande. And so I think you can also keep track by the fact that the name is still the same. So you can kind of use that and then kind of like rabbit hole to like all the way to the the origin or try to find it. But yeah, but it's very difficult to. I don't know if I would consider that. Well, I mean, yeah, kind of, because yeah, it's taking that away, but then it's even worse because you change it completely. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, we're gonna take this, we're gonna ban you for dancing it, but we're gonna use it, but we're gonna make it more kind of posh kind of situation. And so I think it's like more about stealing. And what it's a pity is that it would be nice to kind of acknowledge it and kind of like respect it and be like, okay, this is how we dance it now, but hey, this is what you used to do. And this is like, it's more like about acknowledging and respecting it and being also grateful for what it was and what it is now, because that's the thing about the evolution.
I was just also having a question about this Lundu that you have played, this andante.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there was a score, right?
Yes.
Written by a slave. Could you tell more about that source?
So it's a very old, but so again, this is in the Brazilianese library. So it's someone that does like additions and found the scores and then change it. And so it's like, it's very beautifully written now. There's nothing much to say because it's anonymous. So already there you're kind of like, oh, okay. But we know that like these people, they would perform. And so it means that, again, hypothetically speaking, it means that they would have access to a piano. Okay, but how do they have access to a piano?
Or a harpsichord even.
Or a harpsichord, a pianoforte, you know? So it means that they would have access to the maître's house, to their owners. So it means that, so this means that they could actually perform in the piano, maybe when the master was not there. So we know that this was a practice, as in they would have their slaves perform in their houses in small gatherings when they would have their guests or like small parties and have like what I called elevator song. It means that you're there, but you're not really listening to this music. It is, again, it's a score that makes you ask a lot of questions as well. Like, you know, but the thing is, there's not a lot of information.
But is it a manuscript? Was it written?
It's an edition, but it's someone that edited because the manuscript is completely like unreadable.
Destroyed.
It's very well written. It's kind of like the same motif that comes back all the time. So the same rhythm that is very used in Lundu, like the dotted rhythm, that it keeps coming back and coming back and coming back, which is very interesting. Was it improvised? Maybe. Was it composed? Also maybe. You know, it's the questions. There are just questions because it just gives more questions.
And do we have some documents, some letters maybe that are describing those kind of gatherings where the slaves were performing?
Yeah. And this guy, actually, you can read again from my friend's book because he wrote a book about it, Ricardo Barros. And when in the book you find everything there, and it's insane. It's actually very beautiful, but it's like exchanges. There's and documents and not treatises, but like documents that they would gather and give a little party or a little séance and have their slaves to come and perform the Lundu that was banished. So it's very funny to like they banned this music, but then you can perform for me now.
Yes, but it is like, do you know this kind of Wunderkammer idea or like curiosity cabinet? That's why also people of color were in the iconographic examples. We could find them on paintings. Horrible idea.
Mm-mm.
But as my guest before you, she was talking about dehumanizing.
Yeah.
For some reasons, some people, they dehumanized the other people. And you were talking about the trauma. And you were mentioning that trauma is an emotional language. Could you maybe highlight on that? Because I think I totally agree, and it's a very poetic and very sad idea also.
The thing is, trauma, even nowadays when we have trauma, it's actually very funny because why do I say emotional language is because also, first of all, even when we have trauma, let's say like in the family, even if it's not really connected to us, we feel it, that there's something wrong. There's like, there's in the family, there's like this pattern. It is weird. And so we feel it. So that's the emotional part. And so when you have this kind of like emotional, you can either use it for good or for bad because you can release it. And that's what the dance does. It releases. But it's also the bad because it keeps in the DNA. And this is actually proven that trauma travels the DNA. And so that's why people talk about generational trauma. And so the importance of the power of emotional and how to kind of like transmute it eventually, how to release it either through dancing or to rituals with fire and fertility rituals or sensual dances. This is the way that they had to cope. You know, nowadays we have a lot of things. We have therapy, we have Instagram gurus,
escape reality.
Exactly. But we have that privilege nowadays, you know, even though that we're not really facing the emotional consequence, let's say. But I think that is important to as well to, and that's actually something that I did not say there, but it is important to, because it's also our responsibility to heal that. And that for them at the time, dancing, singing, playing was a way to release, you know. But then the thing is, trauma travels. And so it still maintains in the DNA. So it's our work now that we have access to so many things to actually work on that and to actually release that.
I was thinking, did Handel know about the background of sarabande? Like, was
Maybe
he
not.
aware of that? And what it means to us to perform a sarabande written by Handel in a historically informed way?
Probably Handel did not know. Actually, the reality might have been that he actually did not know. Also, we don't have internet back then. So he has the information that is given to him, as in, a sarabande is a slow dance. And so that's what he does.
But maybe he knew the steps in the Baroque perspective.
No, that's for sure. But he's not going to go like, oh, maybe this is like a fertility ritual. I don't think he had that, you know. He didn't have that privilege, again, that we have, because we have access to this little box that gives us like multiple universities and, again, views. I don't think he would know. So, yeah, he writes for the sarabande that we know and we perform today. Yeah, of course.
How do you experience our contemporary nowadays reality as a musician, as an artist, as a curious person who does this kind of research?
I've always been very blessed to be surrounded with really nice people. And it's very funny, like the more I let go, like the more the things that I believe come to me, like being here today. And my only task, which is a very difficult one, is not being so much in control, which is very difficult for me and also as musicians, because we like to like know everything like yesterday. And so the more I kind of let go of like the control of the outcome and like this and oh my God, the more fun I have. Yeah. So my advice is have fun, I guess.
Great. Thank you very much for the
you.
conversation. It was amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. That was so cool.
Sure. Two perspectives, two time-traveling invitations, from the roots to the future. If this episode sparked questions or reflection, stay with us. The next episode takes us into the heart of the repertoire itself and the ways we speak, sing, and think about it. Thanks for listening. Bye.